Hello and welcome to the Instructional Design Seminar that is facilitated by UMass Amherst. Here during this beautiful fall day, we typically invite experts from instructional design field and instructors from UMass Amherst, where we discuss learning technologies, approaches, and we share best practices that can significantly improve student experiences mm, in both corporate and academic settings. So before I introduce our today's panelists, I'll briefly discuss the topic that we decided to have today during this seminar. Today we will be discussing accessibility topic, how can technology and human insight support all learners. The reason is not only because the federal compliance law that is the deadline for that is April 2026, but because we also noticed a lot of interest from instructional designers, from faculty, learning technology specialists, who ask a lot of questions about accessibility. And we know that faculty, they know how to teach, how to present content, but sometimes it's frustrating to receive requests such as you need to make sure that your content is accessible, right? So here during this seminar, we will try to address this and discuss what accessibility is. But all the participants who registered for today's seminar, we asked them two questions. The first question was about who tends to benefit when course content is designed to be more accessible. And 98% of you mentioned that all students, regardless of ability, which is a good sign. So it's clearly that we all understand that accessible content is not just for people with disabilities, but for all. I'm an international person, and I feel like I sometimes need all these accessibility features like closed captions and etc. However, when we ask another question, the second question, before today, how often did you consider accessibility when designing or updating course materials? Only 55 of you mentioned that always. Uh-oh, right? So we need to fix these numbers. And that is why we decided to discuss the topic today. We will be discussing a couple of questions throughout the seminar, but trust me, we have a lot of questions. We will be discussing what happens to student engagement when we add accessibility measures, what makes content accessible and how to spot the difference, what are common accessibility mistakes and how to avoid them, and what does the future of accessible course design look like. To discuss these questions, we invited four wonderful experts, and I'll ask them to share their story, share their background with you. And I'd like to start with Sarah. Sarah, if you don't mind, to share your background. Thank you.
Of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Mercier, and I'm the CEO of Build Capable, which is a learning technology company. Super excited to be here with all of you. I'm also a certified professional in accessibility core competencies through IAP, which I'm very, very proud of. I always tell people I think I'm more proud of that than my MBA. And I'm also the editor of Design for All Learners, Create Accessible and Inclusive Learning Experiences. I'm also one of the contributing authors, along with 25 other fantastic, incredible, amazing people, which I just found out today was shortlisted for the Get Abstract International Book Awards for Learning Impact. So I'm really excited to be talking about this topic today to celebrate. So thank you for inviting me to join you all.
Hey, thank you so much. Luis, I'm going to hand over to you.
Hello, everybody. Great to be with you all today. I'm Luis Perez, Senior Director of Disability and Accessibility at CAST. CAST is the national nonprofit that originated the Universal Design for Learning framework. I'm part of our post-secondary and workforce development group where I teach a number of courses, I do consultation, and I develop content. By training, I'm an instructional designer. And then I also got my PhD in special education with a focus on universal design for learning from the University of South Florida. I am the author of Dive into UDL from the International Society for Technology and Education. And lastly, I am a certified professional in web accessibility through the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. Actually, I lied. Lastly, I identify as a disabled person. I use disability first language, and I have significant visual impairment. So if you see me looking at another monitor on the side, it's because I have things magnified on my secondary monitor. So I'm really excited to be here, and I'll pass it on to the next person.
Thank you so much, Louis. Ashley, I will hand over to you.
Hi, I'm Ashley Woodman, Director of the Developmental Disabilities and Human Services Specialization at UMass Amherst. I have not written a book and I'm feeling a little guilty about that, but I'll put it on my to-do list maybe by the next webinar. So I run an undergraduate specialization in disability and I teach disability studies courses. My background is in applied developmental psychology, and I bring lived experience as a disabled academic and neurodivergent academic. So I think a lot of my connection to this topic is, man, I wish I really had this as an undergrad, and also trying to implement this in my own courses and in my own program, which I hire adjunct instructors for. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And Erica.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erica Foley. I'm one of the instructional designers and ideas at UMass Amherst. And before this, I was a teacher. I was a middle and high school teacher, and I also taught in higher education in a teacher preparation program. And what brings me to this work is both my own experiences and, growing up, my best friend was hard of hearing, and my dad has Parkinson's and macular degeneration. And so I feel like I've learned so much about accessibility and disability from him, about how to make things operational when touch screens or mouses are harder to work with, or really understanding the experience. And the more I've learned about it, the more you can't unsee it. You see it everywhere once you've started to understand it better. So that's part of why I'm excited to share more today.
Thank you so much. And my name is Slava Yurchenkov. I'm the manager of instructional design here at IDS Group. I'm going to facilitate today's event with my team of instructional designers and myself. We work closely with faculty at UMass Amherst. We support them with accessibility. We help them to brainstorm ideas on how to design courses, what engagement techniques to use, as well as we do have a lot of self-paced courses for our instructional designers. And one of them is Accessible U. That's the project where we help instructors to get the idea of how to make courses accessible, how to create digital content accessible. So we launched this project earlier this year, and we noticed a lot of interest from our instructors. So these are all introductions. Before we start our discussion, I'd like to reassure you that we are recording this seminar, and you'll be able to watch the recording later this week. We're going to create a clean version and publish that on our IDEAS website, as well as IDEAS YouTube channel. We will also send a key takeaways email to all our participants who sign up for this event. So you'll receive an email in a couple of days after today's seminar. Also, thank you so much for sending so many questions before the seminar. We received so many of them, and we know that we have more than 300 participants today, which is really exciting because we can see that the topic is, I'll say, it is an interesting topic to discuss, right? However, if you feel that you want to ask more questions, feel free to do so. We do have YouTube live chat. There is no reason to wait for a special signal from me. Anytime you think you'd like to ask a question, feel free to do so. If you cannot find the YouTube chat, you can also send the questions to the instructional-design@umass.edu email address, and my team who is monitoring this email address will forward these questions to me. You can find the email address in the YouTube description, or if you are watching us through the IDEAS webpage, there is a description of how to send those questions there. With that being said, I think we're all set and we are ready to start our discussion. And I have the first question, and the question is, what happens to student engagement and learning outcomes when accessibility is missing? Sarah, I will start with you again.
I love how we're starting with me. Put me on the spot. So I think that it's important for me to preface this by saying that in my work, I'm always trying to find ways to design the best possible solution for as many people as possible. And one of the things that I have found is that when you aren't thinking about accessibility, and I have to believe that Luis is going to talk about this, is that when you're not designing for accessibility and you're not thinking about removing barriers, you are putting barriers in front of a lot of folks. And a lot of those folks have disabilities. And a lot of the folks that have disabilities may not even know themselves that they have disabilities. So when we think about effective training, effective learning experiences, if there are barriers to accessing it, then why are we, like, we're missing the whole point. If somebody can't access something, forget about engagement. You haven't even gotten there. You haven't even gotten into it. So how can you engage with something that you can't access? And I think at its core, I try to think about where can I remove barriers to accessing and engaging with content before I even think about, will they like it? Do they think it's fun? Is it interesting? Does it solve a problem? If you can't even get into it, it doesn't matter. So I think that might be a good way to kind of kick off this conversation and, and let others kind of chime in here.
I'll chime in just by saying that, we have limited capacity, right, for attention, for focus, for effort. And often we need to consider the mechanics of learning and the content that we're trying to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And often we present barriers in the mechanics,
Yeah.
right? And when, to your point, Sarah, if you have those barriers in the mechanics of learning, how you get to the course, how you navigate the course, how you're able to consume the information, then what's left for understanding? If you're spending all of your time just trying to get access to the information. So by addressing the barriers, and I love that you focus so much on barriers, because with Universal Design for Learning, we really focus on barrier busting to
Mhm.
make sure that learning works for as many people as possible, right? By addressing the barriers in the mechanics, then we free up all the mental energy so that now you can focus on understanding. And so I would argue that you're actually providing a setting for deeper learning,
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
right? When we address the barriers that are in just the mechanics, then we can engage in deeper learning and make more connections and so on. So it does support learning. It's not just access for access sake. It's access to support learning.
To add into that is that as you were talking, I was thinking about when I teach that there's an instructional design program I teach for the Association for Talent Development, and we talk about reducing cognitive load. And we talk
Mm-hmm.
about extraneous cognitive load. You want to talk about like that is if we want to talk about it from a learning design perspective or an adult learning theory perspective, if you want to reduce cognitive load, you can start by removing a bunch of stuff that people shouldn't have to do in the first place. And that kind of leads into like how I came into this in the first place was really more from a through the lens of usability, right? And user experience. And so this, you can kind of come at this from different angles, but when you're thinking about, what are the things that are preventing people from accessing it, it prevents way more people from accessing that than we might assume.
I would love to jump in to add that when I think about this in my own classroom or in the classrooms of faculty that I'm working with, accessibility can be on somewhat of a spectrum in terms of there are some folks who their needs will mean that they can't access any of their materials, but more often students can access those materials with a lot of effort. And so sometimes, especially in a college course, you'll see students at the start of the year, back to this cognitive load, where at the start of the year, you have that energy and that momentum that you put in all of that extra work to access the same information that someone can access much more easily. And it slowly wears away where it takes all of that energy, and that can look like students burning out midway through the semester or crashing out or getting to a point where they're just so exhausted. And so This is something that I think affects instructors, whether or not you know it with your students. You might see students coming in at the start of the year full energy, and then you're like, where did they go? Or what's happening? You're just
Mhm.
falling off. And that can indicate that there are accessibility barriers that are, again, taking away the energy, the time, the momentum on learning and forcing them to put it into just getting the material into a form where they can use it.
I'll just jump in to add, I mean, I think it's been emphasized, but just the emotional load that takes. I think I see a lot of faculty putting up unnecessary barriers because they say, oh, well, they could just email me and ask for
Mhm.
And I think there's a big misunderstanding. Like some people just get so exhausted by constantly negotiating their access needs, they're not going to email you. Just make it accessible to everyone from the get-go. I mean, I know students who spend hours and hours converting all of their readings to, audio format at the beginning of the semester. And like you said, they fall behind, things get busy, and it just accumulates over time. And, when I read this question, I was thinking about what happens in the big picture. Students disengage not just from your class, but academia in general, and the data
Mhm.
support this. People with disabilities are pushed out the higher you go up the ladder, right? We have 1% of STEM degrees going to disabled PhDs. So I think it's important to think about the small context of one particular classroom, but also the big picture of what happens cumulatively.
Thank you. Speaking of the data, there was a follow-up question from from our participants. Are there any research showing that all learners benefit?
Yes. And if I had time, I could pull up lots of links to it. So I know that in Design for All Learners in my book, we have references galore to research.
Mhm.
IAP, this is all me working off of memory here, but IAP has a site that talks about the business case
Mhm.
for accessibility. And they have some research and statistics there that would be helpful to reference. And I can get that link that talks about the benefits for everyone. When you're focusing on removing barriers for folks for disabilities, which is critical for some of these folks, right? They won't be able to access it at all. But then the benefits, the additional benefits for everyone else.
And I would say if you just start like paying attention, you'll see lots of examples of this in your everyday lives.
Absolutely.
There's an article on the curb cut effect, right, by Angela Blackwell. I think she was out of Stanford at the time. But anyway, if you think about curb cuts, right, they were designed for people who use wheelchairs. Well, who uses them now? Parents pushing a stroller, delivery people pushing a cart with heavy equipment, travelers who have heavy luggage, right? What's essential for some can be helpful for most, right? And if we think about captioning, it's not just people who are deaf and hard of hearing. Obviously, it was designed with them in mind, but I use captioning when I'm watching a show from the UK because English is my second language and sometimes I have a hard time with the dialects. Or maybe I'm learning STEM content. I'm a liberal arts person. So STEM often has a specialized vocabulary and it helps me to see some of the terms on screen at the same time that I'm listening to them. Or maybe I'm in an environment like a library where I can't turn on the audio and maybe I don't have my headphones, but I can still follow
Mhm.
along with captioning. So I think with universal design, right, that idea that if we design for one group of people, there are often other benefits. Once you start looking for it, you can't unsee it. Automatic doors, right? Benefit people who may not be able to, maybe using a wheelchair to get into the building. But what if you have groceries and your hands are busy? And you can use your elbow to push that button and get into the building.
There is also, another question from the audience. We keep telling that accessibility is really important for student engagement. There was a comment from our audience that someone thought about Steve Jobs, who mentioned that less is more, and if you have less instructions, but it's clear what you need to do, it's great. But sometimes we do have such mindset from different instructors that, well, I don't have a student with a documented disability. Why do you want me to do this? And also, there's too much work. So, how do you think instruction designers who work with faculty can, eliminate this, help instructors to understand that it's not about, having a student in class that has official documentation that they have disability.
I mean, just to throw some UMass numbers on this, I think we know from some of the campus surveys that only half of students with disabilities on campus are actually registered. So like that's
Yeah.
just baseline important for everyone to keep in mind. Because I think sometimes there's this assumption that like, oh, well, if there's a student with a disability, I'll get an accommodation letter and I can deal with that sort of as an accommodation rather than a proactive strategy. But a lot of students won't have that because getting the, testing and all of this, there's many barriers to actually following through with that.
Yeah, I'm going to bring in my lived experience as somebody who was diagnosed with a disability in higher education while trying to complete a degree. And it's a tough thing to do, right? It's an emotional journey to, disclose that you have a disability. And so that's a process, right? And you may not be ready to do that right away. You have to work through those feelings. Like you may have certain feelings around your new diagnosis and so on. And you have to work through those feelings before you can reach out to somebody else and say, well, I need support, right? Or I have these challenges or barriers. But what if we change the question around and assume that you're going to have a student with a disability because the majority of disabilities are non-apparent, right? So assume that if we look at the population statistics, the latest data from the CDC says that roughly one quarter of the population has some sort of disability. So in a course of 50 students, you do the math. There's a really good chance you're going to have a few students that even if they don't present a letter of accommodation, they likely do have a disability that makes reading difficult or writing difficult and so on. So what if we, instead of like being reactive or responsive, we turn it around and are proactive and assume that we're going to have a variability in our classroom that we need to design for.
And these are also the instructors, like you described, that are going to panic when they do finally have a student with a documented disability, and they're going to have no idea, wait, how do I even add closed captions to videos or make my readings accessible for screen readers? So even if you just make it selfish about their workload down the road, like learn these skills now, be proactive, because once you have a student with a documented disability, like you're going to panic and not know what to do, and it's going to really derail you for that semester. Like at the outset, suddenly you have to caption all this material.
That's actually what really concerns me because from this regulation perspective, we are concerned here at Ideas Group that a lot of faculty will start thinking about that only in March or April of the next year. And I mean, that's too late. We have all the resources now, and it's time to start thinking about now. And, some people tell it's too late to even start thinking about this now, right? But we still have time, so we definitely have to start thinking how to remediate the content to make it accessible. I see Sarah wants to add something.
I'm really glad that everybody else jumped in first because that question is emotionally very triggering to me. That question is the question that motivated me throughout the entire book process of writing this book, because my background is in working with organizations to design learning experiences. And my company, like that's how we make our money, right? Is working with people and to build these things. And if I were to approach every question to say, well, should we make it accessible? Should we charge for that? Like, what is it going to take an extra time? And my organization was built on the principle that we just have to assume that everybody has a disability and change the way we design from the beginning, because it is a very expensive, time consuming process to retrofit whatever you design to make it accessible after the fact, it takes almost no extra time if you design that way to begin with. I have designed learning experiences, we have designed products. We have the only learning technology on the market that is accessible for both learners and administrators. And we built that tool to be accessible from the beginning, and we passed the web content accessibility guidelines, the AA guidelines at every single level with no exceptions because we built it that way. But if I were to build it not to be accessible and then have to change it after the fact, we would have had to rebuild the whole system. So one of the things that I try to encourage, and this is the reason why I did this book, is that I wanted designers to know that there's another way. And when you're approaching this from a universal design perspective and you're planning for it in advance, it changes the way you design it. And that means that you don't have to worry as much about making accommodations because you've removed all the barriers that you can up front. So you have fewer accommodations to make later. It doesn't mean you won't make accommodations ever, but it means that the likelihood that you'll have to have someone email you and ask you for another version, have someone ask you to access this in a different format. If you thought about it ahead of time, then you don't have to go back and quote unquote fix it for someone to be able to access it. And so I think one of the things, Slava, that you mentioned, if you start now and start changing your practice now, what ends up happening is you just start to design differently going forward, and that process becomes way easier. And because we have to, in my company, track all of this and the time that we spend, I can tell you I have the data in my organization to prove that it does not take extra time to make things accessible if you do it that way to begin with. But as you're transitioning to that, you will have to get up to speed. You will have to change some processes. That part of it's going to take time, but you will get to a point where it's not going to take you a ton of extra time to do this. It'll just be part of the way you design and build things.
And I think we will discuss this a bit later. That sometimes what I notice is that instructors, they feel that they need to change everything right away, and that's why they feel frustrated that that's too much work. But maybe we should start with some small things, right? And then there is no expectation to make everything right away accessible, right? So we can take those small steps and remediate content by content, with those small things, and this is eventually will become accessible. Speaking of that, oh yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say the small things, some of those small things are the ones that have the largest impact for the most people. So
Exactly.
when you knock out one thing, if you just start adding captions, if you just start adding alt text, they're just check your color contrast, right? And contrast, like those are the things that they meet such a wide range of people that the small things have big wins.
Yeah, and before we move on to like the specifics, I think the mindset is what's important. If you bring a mindset to it and then you kind of take a +1 approach, where like I'm going to start with some simple practices at first and I'm going to get comfortable with those, and then over time I'm going to build on them and seek continuous improvement. That's really the key, right? That's what's really important, is bringing that mindset. And I'll share a metaphor that I often use when it comes to design. It comes from cooking, right? And it's I want to credit the right person. Cordelia McGee Tubb came up with a quote. When we're sharing a muffin with somebody, we don't just take a regular muffin and throw a bunch of blueberries on top and say, this is a blueberry muffin. Here, enjoy, right? We have to build in the blueberries or the chocolate chips or whatever it is into the batter. We have to bake it in. And so we want to bring that same mindset to accessible design, that we're building it in from the start, right? We're putting the blueberries in the batter before we bake it. And then here you go. Here's a blueberry muffin, right? That's a little bit more inclusive design. And of course, we can leave them out if you have an allergy to blueberries, but you get my idea here, right? So proactive, but also that this is front loaded. Sometimes, to be honest with you, it may take a little bit more effort and time at the beginning, but it also saves time and effort at the end, right? So it is front loaded. And so that's important to clarify.
How about we show the difference, Erica? I know that you have some examples, so let's kind of get the idea what makes content accessible, how to spot the difference. Let's show an accessible example, if you don't
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah, thank you. So this is going to be an example about using heading structures. The example I'm going to use is from my own syllabus that I wrote, and when I wrote it, I hadn't known about heading structures, and a student of mine taught me about it. So I'm going to show what it looks like in my syllabus to find the required text that my students needed to purchase or acquire to be able to participate in my course. So this is what it looks like if a heading structure is included. So instead of using bold or a font change, I had used tagged headings to show.
Accessible syllabus docs. All lower ribbon. Zone top leaving menus. Accessible syllabus docs. K. X.edit 460 : subject dash specific methods 1 for middle and secondary teachers button. Instructor information but course date and time button. Course description button. Course objectives button. Guiding questions button. Required text button. Enter. Accessible syllabus docs. Muhammad G. Left parent 2020 right parent. Cultivating genius : an equity framework.
So just like a sighted user would be able to visually scan the headings and say, I need to find the section about required text. I'm just going to scroll to the required text section. Boom, there I go. If you have heading structure tagged in there, you can use this left menu bar to tab through those headings. So a screen reader user could just find the section that they need, find the information that they need. However, if you don't have your heading structures tagged, this is what it would sound like to try to find the same information. Let me make sure that you're sharing the right thing. Okay. So this is a document without a heading structure to a screen reader.
Inaccessible syllabus docs. X.edit 460 : subject dash specific methods 1 for middle and secondary teachers. 2 credits. Fall 2024. Instructor information. Name : Erica Foley. Email : link foley@valiant.edu. Office hours : 4:30-5 p.m. on Thursdays or by appointment on Zoom. Blank. Course date and time. Course days / times : Thursday evenings 5 o'clock - 8 p.m. Location : on Zoom - link : link https://valiant.zoom.a/96,328,448,960. Blank. Course description. Edit 460 is the first part of the 2-part series with Edit 462. In the course, one goal for our time together is to build your knowledge of lesson planning and unit design through backwards planning principles. You will put your knowledge to work by craft lesson plans based on teacher and peer feedback. The other goal of the course is to build your sense of self-efficacy as an educator and facilitator of learning for your students. You will examine different models of classroom management and you will develop your personal plan and philosophy. You will put your knowledge to action through reflecting on your own teaching, observing others, and developing a toolkit of structures and strategies to implement as a student teacher and when you're in your own classroom. Blank. This method prepare most of this course needs us to work in the plan. Second and multi-course full responsible areas, full of approaches to plan, full of routine, full of choices. Blank. Required texts. Muhammad G. Historically responsive literacy left parent 2020.
So I think you catch my drift when we were talking about the cognitive load that it takes just to get a very simple piece of information, because a screen reader cannot tab through or scan through headings if they're not tagged into the document. Your student has to re-listen to your entire syllabus just to find one little bit of information, right? Like they've already decided they're taking the course, they know your course description, but just to get that one piece of information takes so much more time. I used fast forward for emphasis, but that's what it would take for every, if you can imagine that be for every piece of information that they have to take in. It's an incredible amount of work and it really adds up.
Can I make a quick observation too? Because we're talking about universal design. I noticed that you have the navigation pane open when in Microsoft Word, and I would encourage everyone to use that pane because it simulates what a screen reader experience is like. That you can skip to different parts of the document by selecting options in the navigation pane. But there's another benefit here, since we're talking about universal design. Guess who else benefits from a properly tagged heading structure that can be exposed through the navigation pane? People with ADHD. Because if you have a long document, right, I may be looking for required text, but to get there, I'm going to look at lots of different pieces of content and I'm going to likely be distracted by some of it. So if we make it so that there is an easy way to skip around the document, somebody with ADHD can look at that table of contents, if you will, in the navigation pane, and then skip around to the section that they want and really conserve their focus and their energy so that they can focus on exactly what they need out of that resource.
Hmm. And a lot of this is something that, myself as a sighted user would never have even thought of until I really started to understand how all different people use these documents, right? Like it makes sense that you may not have known how to do this originally. I hadn't even been taught to use heading structures until learning about it in this context. But now that I know, it is such a small shift on my part. Instead of changing a font size and maybe bold to use heading structure instead, but it makes a huge difference for users. The one other example I can show calls back to Ashley talking about when students receive our readings, when you have something like certain types of scanned PDFs. Sometimes screen readers, like to a visual person, it may seem like it's totally fine. And then if a student uses a screen reader, it can sound something like this.
OLMGMT.pdf Google Chrome. Unlabeled graphic, unlabeled graphic, unlabeled graphic. Thumbnail for page 2 tab. Thumbnail for page 3 tab, 3 of 11. Unlabeled graphic, unlabeled graphic.
So there are going to be times where, unless you have known to test it or unless you know how these parts work, it can create infinitely more work for your students.
Thank you so much. Well, these are clear examples of what people will experience if the content is not accessible. There was the question, Erica, about the hidden text. So, and the participant is correct. So when Erica mentioned hidden text, we're talking about the styles within Microsoft Office. And Google Docs, they also have styles, and you can choose different headings, titles. There was
Yeah.
another question. There was another question I heard. We can use heading 1 as title, but we cannot use heading 3 and then heading 1. That's correct, right? So we typically start with heading 1 now, H1, right?
Yeah, often H1, please correct me if I'm wrong, anybody on this panel, but heading 1 is often the title page. If you're designing on a website for web design, H1 is the title of the web page, and then subheadings are like chapters in your book, and then you can have sub-chapters within your chapters, and so your heading structure can follow that logical organization to help people understand the organization of those ideas.
Amazing.
I
Sarah.
was just going to say real quickly, so use your H1, H2, H3, H4 and use it in the order. So H1 is your heading, that's going to be your title and so forth. The other benefit is also for us as the designer or the instructor, because instead of having to highlight everything and make it bold, 24, bold, 15 or whatever, just set up your heading styles, your H1, H2, and then every time you only have to highlight it and click H1 or highlight it and click H2. So it's even faster for us too, from a design perspective, than trying to make each style in line.
I appreciated that while working on my dissertation, my 300-page dissertation in my book, right? If somebody said you need to change this style to, look a certain way, I could do that at once. And the changes cascaded throughout the document. So yes, it's a very time-saving um, feature, but also it helps because we don't know what the end format of information is going to be, right? So that if we focus on having a good structure, this may start out as an accessible Microsoft Word document, but ultimately you might share it as an accessible PDF, right? And if we have a logical heading structure, then it's more likely that that PDF is also going to be accessible so that you can navigate it with not just the screen reader, but other technologies as well, right? So it's not just about like the end use of it, but also the portability of the information and the usability of it.
So we've started discussing the common issues, but first we'd like to ask our participants. We have an online interaction for you guys, and if you can scan the QR code that you can see on the screen now and choose the option that, like, which accessibility issue do you think is most common in online courses you've seen? That will be great because we're going to discuss these results and then we're going to discuss the most common accessibility issues that our experts seen from their experiences. So I will read this question aloud. Which accessibility issue do you think is most common in online courses you've seen? And we do have 5 options here. Option A, poorly formatted PDFs or slides. For instance, no headings, hard to read. The second option is missing captions or transcripts for videos and audio. The third option is low contrast or hard to read visuals. Option number 4, inaccessible interactive activities, for instance, quizzes, drag and drop. And option number 5, links that aren't descriptive or hard to identify. So if you chose your option, we're gonna I'm gonna see the results and I will highlight the options to our experts and we will start discussing most common accessibility issues. All right, so now I can see the results and 52% of you mentioned that option A, poorly formatted PDFs or slides with no headings, hard to read, is the most common issues that you noticed in the courses. And then 14% mentioned that B and C, so the option missing captions or transcripts from videos and audio, and low contrast or hard to read visuals. So I think these are the most common issues. And I'd like to bring this to our discussion. Ashley, from your experience, what common accessibility issues do you typically see in other courses that you are taking or from your colleagues? No names, just common issues.
It's been a while since I've taken a course, to be honest. But what I hear my students complain about the most, I suppose it would be a good place to start. And it would really be the PDFs. And I get it because like I spend a lot of time. So in all of my courses, I really put together like open access content. So it's like a chapter from this book, an article from this journal. So I don't use textbooks very often. So I find myself scanning a lot. And sometimes you think you have a great scan and kind of like Erica demonstrated, like you put it through. And for me, a tool that I was like, whoa, wow, was like even just perusal is another tool, like an add-on that like you can read it aloud within that tool. And I was like, oh my goodness, like I thought I produced this wonderful, clean PDF. I ran OCR and it still reads like garbage. Also, I use Speechify and kind of this text to speech for myself, and I'll throw it in there and be like, oh wow, it's really not scanning very well. But most of the time it's really poor PDFs where maybe there's like notes written in handwriting in the margins, and you got to think about like, well, some people can see that extra annotation, but if you want everybody to see those annotations, you have to first of all have an accessible PDF, but also think about your annotations being accessible. So again, I use Perusal for that, or a Word doc or a Google Doc with the track changes, like the comments. If it's really important annotations for people to get, because again, like going back to the time burden, for students to actually try to convert all of those texts to the audio formats, even though it's an accommodation on their letter, like faculty aren't providing the audio versions themselves in many cases, or don't know how to, and so the students are trying to figure this out for themselves. And like, there's really easy solutions to this. I mean, yes, there's time to make sure that you're scanning things properly from the get-go. Like the contrast errors sometimes are tricky too with old PDFs, but like we can lean on existing resources at UMass to make this happen. Like if you add a resource through the UMass Library Course Reserves, for example, like they'll scan it and make it look nice and make sure that it's readable. Use the tools that we already have are ready to make this look nice. And I change a lot of my readings just straight up into HTML within Canvas. And again, you just kind of like do the heading structure, and I'll post both because sometimes, especially if it's like a journal article in psychology, we're used to seeing it in a certain PDF format with the columns and the graphics. And so I'll post like, here's the PDF, but here's the accessible version as well. And I know we're going to talk more about figures and tables, so I'll stop there, but that's obviously really tricky too.
Thank you. Luis, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I would just add that even if you had a perfectly accessible PDF, it may still not be an accessible experience for some people. And I'll explain. PDF was designed to print, right?
Mhm.
And what most of our students these days, they're not accessing content on a desktop. They're often on the go and they're accessing the content on a smartphone, right? And so with reading disability, when I zoom in on PDF content, I have to scan a lot. I have to pan in order to get to the next line and so on. And it really tires out my eyes. So the fact is that many publishers have moved on from PDF and now they create content in more accessible formats such as EPUB. So what I would say is request EPUB, right? Make this a procurement issue where we're procuring resources that are already in accessible formats from the get-go as much as possible, because EPUB is designed to be used on different size screens from smartphones to tablets to desktops. And so that again, you're addressing the many different ways that people use. My university is primarily a commuter university. So I need to keep that in mind that most of the time people are going to be reading on the way to school, right? And they're going to be consuming the information in different ways. So we need to consider that as well.
Thank you so much, Erica. I know that you consult a lot of instructors here at UMass,
Yeah.
and Erica is participating in the Course Design Institute project here, where we work closely with faculty. We help them to think through the design of the course in Canvas. And from your experience, what issues you notice from that work with instructors?
Yeah, thank you. Um, I agree that PDFs are definitely one that is a big issue and that I think faculty, as we've said, are concerned about because it can be a lot of work, but we have good resources to make it better. And it is something where I feel very excited about future technologies that are evolving and the ways that, the updated regulations are going to apply not just to higher ed institutions, but to the publishing companies, to everyone. And so that means that we're going to have better resources soon. And that makes me excited about the future of this work. But some other things that I think folks may not realize, but that we see often are things like inaccessible color combinations. They're really good tools that can check that quickly, but I have colleagues who are colorblind, and that's not often recognized as a disability, but is very, very common, and can make a huge difference in people's experiences. Some other things that I have seen are, a sneaky one can be alt text, where having alt text is having a verbal description for an image, which can include infographics or table or graphs, things of that nature. So that's someone who can receive the information verbally, in addition to visually. Sometimes with this, folks may not realize that when they paste an image into a document or on Canvas, sometimes it will automatically create an alt text with the name of the image, and that can be very distracting if the image is, it might have saved on your computer as image 1157329, and then it can offer distracting information. And it can be really helpful when designing to think about exactly what information you want to take in, because when you want your students to take in, because your alt text or how you set up your documents can depend a lot on what is the message you want to receive. So I've worked with faculty who will come to me and they say, I have hundreds of images on my slides. Like, how am I going to write an alt text for every single image on every single slide? And I talked to them about, you have so many of these beautiful visuals, and often they are not what is conveying necessary information. They are adding to tone, or they might be communicating an overall theme, but you don't need an alt text for every single image. That would just bog users down. We can think about what are the key images and what is the key information they need from those images to help convey crucial information.
Thank you. I also know that there is another common issue that we probably all notice in the courses. How about the links click here? Or if we publish the entire link, not hyperlink, but the entire link, right? And I mean, let's say for me, maybe it's not the big deal. I click here, I can click on that, I can see the link. Yeah, but let's say if you're gonna use the screen reader, and the screen reader reads click here, you have no idea where this or if you click where you're going to be sent. Lewis, you probably want to discuss that,
Yeah,
right?
I am a screen reader user, so I could comment on this. Needless to say, if you want cookies for your holidays or cards, do not include click here links in your resources or the full URL. The reason is, just like with headings, screen reader users often bring up a list of headings, a list of links, and that's how we get a sense of like all of the links on the page, right, to save us time. And if they all say click here, it might make sense when you have the rest of the page for context. But if we just have a list of links, it's just going to say click here, click here, click here. And I'm like, what's here? What's going to happen when I follow the link or when I activate that control? And then with the long URLs, they're usually with like SharePoint links or Google Drive links. What happens is it will read docs.google.com. And then after that, it's going to read every single character. So every exclamation mark, every number, letter, right? Because they try to make these long links really unique. And that really bogs us down as screen readers. I just kind of give up and then ask the person, send me an accessible link, because I shouldn't have to spend my time trying to figure out the link, right? We can make that a more useful experience. Put some clothes on those links is what I tell people, right? No naked links. Make sure you put some clothes on them. And the clothes is the descriptive text.
Thank you so much. I'd like to summarize the most common issues that we discussed a few minutes ago. So we discussed heading structure. By that we mean that sometimes these structures, they just highlight the content, make it bold, instead of using the styles in Microsoft Office or Google. Color contrast, maybe we would like to spend some time and discuss, Erica, if you can help me to discuss the color contrast and what's the issue here. Inaccessible PDFs, alt text, and links, sometimes broken links, empty links, or just click here links, which is not really clear where they will go. Erica, would you mind to briefly discuss the color contrast issue?
Yeah, so the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines have a recommended color contrast ratio to use. These are different for small font and for large font, but it makes it more visually accessible to folks both colorblind and in general, depending on, the brightness of the screen, the brightness of the space that you're in when you're on your computer. All of this can make a significant difference, and using good contrast can reduce eye fatigue for folks. Often things like we use Canvas as our LMS, and Canvas has some options for students. Like for some students, having a really strong contrast can be beneficial if they have dyslexia or if they have ADHD. So using kind of a default can be helpful so that it is more accessible to all students. If students want to use those individual settings to help them interact with content.
Ashley,
Yeah, I just wanted
you
to add, it's important for faculty to keep this in mind for their teaching, but also their research, right? So like the Qualtrics default is very poor contrast. And I've, sent some
Mhm.
emails like, can we just change this? But I think it might be out of our hands. But, just very simple, like change the contrast in some of your, web tools that you use for data collection. And it's going to improve the accessibility of your consent form, but also obviously your data collection processes would also benefit from a UDL perspective as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'll
Well,
build
I
on that.
also
I'll build on that too, that I've talked to colleagues who are publishing science research, like I know someone who works in neurobiology and they are publishing research that have very detailed images that are important to the conclusions of their papers. But both for someone with limited vision and even for a novice in the field who doesn't know what to look for, having useful alt text can help convey their information better. And so, as you said, this spills over into our research, into our publishing, into all aspects of our work in higher education.
we do have some interesting comments on YouTube. So when we discussed the links, and Luis, we do have we're using your put some close on those URLs as a new rule. But sometimes it says here there's also IT regulation that says that URL should be visible so that people know what kind of link it is. So what to do, IT regulation or accessibility?
I do have an approach for that because we do create resources that sometimes are meant for use on screen and for use by print as well. So we need to provide a link. Typically, what I recommend is to create a shortened link, right? And so provide a descriptive hyperlink, and then next to it, in parentheses, you will put a shortened link. And you will, in most cases, with a shortened link, you can customize the back half. And I encourage people to use actual words, right, in the back half, and to also use something called camel case. If you don't know camel case, think about the format, the shape of a camel. We want to use the first word of those actual words should be capitalized because that's going to help people with dyslexia and other reading challenges recognize the words in that back half. And then the last thing that I do is I remove the http:// from that shortened link. So an example might be the descriptive hyperlink, and then in parentheses, I'll put something like bit.ly, right? bit.ly, // and then the descriptive back half with camel case. And that way, if you do need to type in the link for whatever reason, you have another option there. But we've taken all the steps possible to make it simpler and easier to understand. And then if I want to go even further, I'll use a QR code. And I'll add the QR code. And I did that in my book. In my book, there are QR codes throughout the book to open digital versions of some of the content that's in the book.
Speaking of QR codes, because there's also the comment that QR codes are also a security issue, but QR codes are basically images, so you can add alt text and you can describe where this QR code will direct you.
You can put in the alt text, QR code to open this resource and describe it, just like any other link. Make it descriptive.
All right, so we discussed so many issues now, and I mean, that is complicated. So let's try to calm our participants down and discuss one change that they can make today that can significantly improve accessibility in their course. Because again, as I mentioned previously, we don't have to change everything right away. But what is the first thing you all think instructors need to consider changing in their courses?
I'm happy to start. As you said, I think it is not going to be possible to do it all at once and just like from yesterday to today, suddenly my course is completely transformed into accessible. It's always going to be steps, and every step forward really matters. One thing that I talk to instructors that I consult with is make sure that your syllabus is fully accessible as possible, because that's a document that students have to refer to so often They have to find certain sections of it. They have to be able to, look back and find certain policies or look back and find certain pieces. That's a really great place to start and to start to learn, to learn those accessibility practices. And in that, you'll end up using heading structure. You'll end up likely using descriptive links. You'll end up perhaps using an alt text. But that's a manageable size chunk that can make a significant difference to students. And then I think, every new thing that you build, as you learn how to use descriptive link texts, or as you learn to put in heading structure, it really becomes second nature. And yeah, every step forward is a step forward and is a moment that you save for your students, or a moment that makes them feel more welcome.
Thank you so much, Sarah. What your recommendation is based on your book?
It doesn't have to even be based on my book. So I can tell you when I started, I actually did a few things at one time, because I think when we say where do you start, there are actually probably 4 things that you can do and start with all of them at the same time, that it's not going to be overwhelming for you. And I love that, Erica, you mentioned start with your syllabus, like the thing that you want to create. So if you're starting with your syllabus, tag all your headings, make sure all your links are descriptive, make sure your contrast is good. So use your dark colors. Also check your color contrast on your link, because to Ashley's point earlier, sometimes the default hyperlinks don't have good contrast. And then make sure that you have alt text on all your images. Those are 4 super easy things that you can start doing all the time. If you're creating a document. If you're creating a video, make sure it has captions that are accurate and a transcript. So I think about it for like, what's the thing I'm making? What's the bare minimum thing I should start with? And so if it were me, I would just think about what's the piece of content that you create the most. If it's documents, hit those top 4. If you're making a lot of video, just start making sure that you do captions and transcripts for all of them. And in 2025, there are a billion different tools, and a lot of them are free to do that can help you do most of the work with a click of a button. So I think that I think about more from a perspective of like, what are you making? If you're making a lot of e-learning, my set of things to start with would be different. So just think about the thing that you're making the most of, and then get used to making that thing very accessible. And then a lot of those practices carry over. And then, like everyone mentioned earlier, then it stacks, right? So you're doing the other format. I'm going to make sure that those things are accessible in that format of that piece of content too. So that's the approach that I take. I think of it more of a workflow than a like just get good at alt text perspective. Is just start doing it. As you do it, you're going to get better at doing those things. Because I can promise you, when you first start doing alt text, it's going to, even a descriptive link, like how do you make your links? Your first shot at it might not be great, but it's 100 times better than not doing it at all. And I share with people the analogy that my kids used with me when I was doing racing. And I would say, well, I'm not very fast in my races. And they would say, well, you're running circles around people sitting on the couch, right? So think about anything that you're doing is making progress forward. So just starting the process, start implementing some of these things, and you'll get better through practice.
Speaking of syllabus, there's a question. What about the references there? APA says to include the full URL for online resources, which as you said can be long and inaccessible. So how to fix that?
Yeah, I do have some tips on that. So one of the things you can do is make sure the references are last. And that way people can get through the rest of the content. But just remember that references are there to like use for reference, right? You may never need to look at them. So the rules are a little bit different for references, right? But just make sure that they are like the last thing that you're sharing. And in Microsoft Word, if you use your references tools, you can create them as endnotes. And those are accessible to screen reader users. So you can find a balance between like meeting the accessibility requirements and meeting the requirements of APA as well. But there is guidance out there. At a minimum, you should make the title of the book or article, make that an active link. a descriptive link so that, again, people can skip through the links and get to the resources. So you're meeting both APH and accessibility requirements.
Ashley.
I'll throw out another one that's easy. Echo 360 won't by default caption your videos, your lecture captures. You actually have to go in and ask for it to caption your material. So like 30 seconds. And they won't turn it on campus wide. So like you have to go in for your course in the settings, turn on the caption. And then if I'm allowed to add a second, which I know you asked for one, would be to like, what's your plan? Like consult with your department. Like what happens if you suddenly have a deaf student in your class tomorrow? Like what's the protocol here? And I feel like that there's not a lot of communication from top down on like what our options are for interpretation, captioning, alt text. Like what if you suddenly have to convert a lot of content very quickly? Other than doing it yourself, like, do you have any other resources at the ready? Yes, there are some free captioning options, but there's also a lot of paid ones that maybe are human generated and ready in 24 hours. Like, do you have a budget for that? Because what I see happening sometimes is, again, that panic. I have a deaf student in my class. I suddenly need to, especially like an online learning course where everything's really just these media-based files. I suddenly have to do all of these captions, and then they waste about 4 weeks trying to figure out who's going to pay for it and who's responsible for it. Like I would say, like from today, like just go back to your department and figure out like what is the protocol for this unit? Like where are we supposed to turn for resources to make these things happen if you do need to suddenly convert a lot of things?
And my quick tip is run the accessibility checker if one is available, because it can often catch a lot of things. They're not perfect, right? So caveat, they're not perfect. They miss certain things. They misidentify certain things, but they will catch, for instance, the easy things like images without alt text. They're not going to guide you in developing great alt text, but at least if you know that an image is missing alt text, then you know that's an image you need to look at and develop alt text for. So run the checker, because our learning management systems now have them. Microsoft Office has them. Put some pressure on Google to build one in. They don't have one built in. And then I will also say, think about must know and nice to know in terms of prioritizing where you're going to spend like your energy and effort. Like the things that are must knows for your course, prioritize those things first. And even for cognitive accessibility, which we started out with, right? And I want to go back to that, and cognitive load. One of the things that I find is that in many of our courses, we have too much content, like too much content all at once. And so that really overloads people. So can we think about how do we present the most essential information first? Like that's the first layer. And then provide options for how people access the rest that is like nice to know or just an enhancement of the information. And then we can prioritize, right, what we need to make accessible first. But really thinking about cognitive load, to go back to Sarah's call to us, right, which is really important. Think about cognitive load as well and cognitive accessibility. That's really important for learning.
We actually started discussing different tools that will help us to make the process easier, right? So I do have two questions. The first one, Sarah, I will ask it to you because we discussed that question together, right? If the goal is to create more accessible content, are there any considerations when it comes to the tools we use?
Yes. So I think when it comes to tools, and this, for the work that I do, it might be easier in some cases than folks that are working in certain universities, depending on who makes decisions in procurement. But one of the things that I try to do, if I'm not in charge of that tool or procuring that tool, is I look online to see where is their accessibility conformance report and what things are accessible in that tool and what the accessibility features are. And Ashley brought up a perfect example of when sometimes there might be accessibility features in that tool and all you have to do is turn them on. So Zoom is a good example. There are tons of accessibility features, but if you don't turn them on in your settings, you're going to show up in a session and people won't be able to turn on closed captions. People won't be able to access some of those features. So know what accessibility features are available in your tools so that you can turn those settings on. The other thing is to, if you are in charge or you have the ability to choose a tool, check and see, do they have a voluntary product accessibility template, a VPAT, or an ACR, an accessibility conformance report? People use those terms interchangeably, but the goal is, can you see where that tool has documented or where that vendor has documented the accessibility in their tool? And the other thing to keep in mind is that those reports are often filled out by the vendor and not vetted by accessibility testers or natural users of assistive technologies, which means that even though it says it might be accessible, it might not be. So tread carefully. Make sure that you always have a way for people to let you know if they've run into a blocker. Notice I didn't say let people let you know when they have a disability. Let people let you know when they've run into a barrier. So that way you can go in and you can check and see, okay, here's the experience that I'm having and reaching out to those folks. So as someone who has created a tool in this organization, and went to great lengths to make sure that it was very thoroughly tested by real users who do this work every day, I think it's really important to be very skeptical about what vendors tell you and test it out for yourself to the best you can. But the easiest way to get started is see what documentation do they have available about the accessibility of their tool. And sometimes you can make decisions about what features you use based on what's accessible and what's not.
I'd also like to reassure all UMass instructors, because at UMass we do have the process when we are implementing new tools to our Canvas course or other tools for teaching. They go through the process. We do have the accessibility team here who check everything before we buy the tool. So that's number one. And now, since AI is a big deal here, right? How can AI tools like ChatGPT, Copilot support instructors in making their content more accessible? Who wants to start? Sarah.
I do, because I just gave a huge talk on this at an international conference this year, and I had to do a ton of research. There are two tools that I want to share with you. One, I'm actually going to share a QR code to it. So if you have a free ChatGPT account or a paid one, it doesn't matter. You can scan this QR code, and this will take you to a GPT that we built, that we made freely available to folks to help you write alt text, to help you make accessibility decisions. It's an accessibility ally GPT that we've trained with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. I like using this particular GPT to have it, I'll drop an image in and have it write starter alt text for me or an image description for me. So like complex images, charts, graphics, I can have it get that process started and then I can edit it from there. Super helpful for writing image descriptions for complex diagrams. I like to use this also to give me guidance on writing in plain language, right? Things like that. So this can be a really helpful tool. The other example that I'll give you is a little bit more advanced, and that is to do audio description versions of videos. And it is an AI tool that, I'll pull it up as well. So this tool is actually used to drop a video in, and it will have the audio description version, which means for someone who is blind or has low vision and is listening to the video but can't see what's happening in the video, it gives audio description, it adds audio description to it to explain what is actually happening in the video. And that's really helpful, and it does it very quickly and very reliably. What I like about that organization is that they have the folks that built that tool are actually have are disabled folks that have built this tool. So they are building this from their own lived experience, which is incredibly important and helpful. It's a tool called VidiScribe, and they do have a free account, and it works incredibly well. So I've used that for audio description version. So these are two AI tools that I think are really helpful. Ethically, I think it's important for me to say that I think we need to be very careful about our usage of AI, and we need to be very strategic about using this, not just for everything because of the power and water usage. So I have to say that personally, when I talk about AI tools, let's be careful and use them very strategically when we are using them to help people.
Yes, Ashley. Let's see what
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I mean, I think the reality is that students are using them. So can we like, for example, we've got a dense theoretical reading, they plug it into ChatGPT for an outline, for like a little bit of scaffolding, like what was the most important thing? What are the key vocab words coming from this reading? They're using it in most cases for all the right reasons, but they're all doing that, right? So if you have a class of 75 students and they're all doing the exact same task on ChatGPT or whatever platform, like, well, can you as the instructor do that task and then clean it up a little bit, right? So maybe ChatGPT thought these were the most important points and you want to customize that and go ahead and post it yourself, right? Like just put it in your learning management system. And I know a lot of faculty would think like, oh, well, they're just going to read the summary. They're not going to read the article. I mean, I think we're just in a new world. Like they might be doing that anyway. So like, wouldn't you rather reduce the environmental impact and have a little bit more control over it? The other fun thing that I tried out at the recommendation of a colleague of mine was AI podcasts. So you plug in the reading and it turns it into a 15-minute kind of conversational style podcast, summarizing the key points of the readings. Again, you as the instructor can kind of tweak it and make sure it's like accurate to the key takeaways, but it just kind of changes the format and is more accessible to some people.
Yeah, that's Notebook LM from
There it is.
Google.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah.
Allows you to drop in an article and create not just the podcast, but also questions to go
Yep.
along with it.
Yeah.
Key points. So I often use that for videos where I provide a set of questions before people watch the video, practicing universal design for learning, right? So that we're making people goal directed as they're watching something or they're going through an activity. So you can ask the ChatGPT or whatever LLM you use, come up with 3 or 4 guiding questions. And then at the end, I'll also use it to develop 3 or 4 takeaways, right? So that way they have like the big ideas, the main ideas that they can then fill in the details from the reading or the video, whatever activity it is. So I use it for that a lot. I use it for summaries. For, like you said, I think, was it Ashley that said plain language summaries? Lainey Feingold, the disability rights lawyer, is a great model for that because on every article she has at the top what you're going to find in that resource. So again, you can make decisions about how much time you have and so on to spend on that article based on the summary and the like.
Because we've discussed the most common issues, we shared some tips on how to make courses accessible. We'd like to launch another poll here. And basically, it's more about what do you guys think? What is one thing you could implement in your courses today to immediately improve student access? So as you can see here on the screen, there's another QR code that is actually the same poll that, the previous poll. You can also see the link. So if you can use your device and scan the QR code and choose the option, that will be great. I will read the options for you. So the first one, A, improve heading structure and formatting of documents. Option B, add captions or transcripts for videos and audio. Option C, provide multiple ways to access and engage with content. Option D, simplify navigation and organize course layout more clearly. And option E, make interactive activities such as quizzes, assignments more accessible. I'll give some time for our participants to choose the option, and then we will see what the results are. All right, so I do have results, and 33% of you mentioned that you will provide multiple ways to access and engage with content. That's a really great option. 22% mentioned that they will improve hidden structure and formatting of documents. Another great option. And 22% mentioned that they will simplify navigation and organize course layout more clearly. I think these are pretty easy steps, right? To simplify navigation, to provide multiple ways of to access and engage with content, and improve hidden structure. And as was discussed, we need to start improving hidden structure in our syllabus first. Thank you so much. So and we do have around 15 minutes to discuss the last section of our seminar, and this is the future of accessibility. And I have questions for all our participants. This can be like a brief answer, but what does the future of accessible course design look like to you? Erica, would you like to start?
I can start. I think about a couple of things when I think about the future of accessible course design. One is that, kind of as we've talked about, all of the tools that we use are going to become more accessible because they have to. And that means that like the water is rising, all ships are going to be lifted by it, right? So I think about, just recently, when you export a Google document into a PDF, it now does save the heading and accessibility tagging. Like, these different platforms are going to be making their work more accessible, and that's going to help us make our work more accessible. So that's something that I'm excited about in terms of the future. I'm also excited to see ways that AI can be usefully integrated. I don't think that AI can do everything for us because only we as the content designers really know what exactly we want our audience to receive. AI can't do that part for us, but there are a lot of ways that it can help with accessibility checkers and other integrated tools have these pieces. Like, as the technology improves, all of this is going to become second nature to us as designers, and the tools that we're going to have are going to be better. And that means that it's all going to create a better experience for our students. And I'm glad that that is the direction of the world.
Yeah, right. What about you?
This is something I didn't really expect to talk about this today, but something I've been thinking about a lot lately is the folks that we unintentionally exclude from doing this job, from being an instructional designer, because the tools that we have are not accessible. And what I believe that we can look forward to is having more individuals with disabilities that actually do this work and having more representation. A good colleague of mine, he's blind, and he has a background in game development, and I've been working a lot with him recently. And some of the things that I learned from him, because he's doing this work, about tools that he finds more accessible than others or not, or challenges he's running into. I'm learning a lot because I have a colleague with a disability that is doing the same job I'm doing. And so I think that we talk a lot about, like, what can we do for learners? What can we do for learners? Well, I think if there's more representation of folks with disabilities who are doing this job, then you end up having more accessibility in the content that you're producing. And I would like to see more of our tools be accessible for administrators, and not having an assumption that just because you maybe have a vision disability or a hearing disability that you can't do this job. And so that's the kind of future that I would like to have in our field, instead of just only thinking about the learners. I think if we have more representation, then that becomes better for everybody. And thanks, Erica, for your comment about all boats rising. That's kind of what led me to want to say that today. So thank you for that.
Sarah, I'm so happy to hear you say that. I actually wrote that down to say as well. As a faculty member, I mean, I think this collaboration with like people with lived experience, people like collaboration with instructional designers, like from the get-go. I mean, I make use of all of the different offices on campus that will help me out, like Center for Teaching and Learning, ideas, like anybody who's willing to sit down with me and like go through my materials. Like I always appreciate it. And this might not be very popular, but I really think we're going to hit a point at which we have to require faculty to have some baseline awareness of this. I say this as a faculty member, and I get that this is like a sensitive thing to require faculty, but like I think most people are just truly not aware of a lot of the barriers that they're putting in place. And once you get them in a room and show them, and I don't mean an online asynchronous mandated training that they can completely ignore, like a real way to support people through this. Like that's what I hope for in future accessible course design, like these collaborations from the get-go, creating courses, and to support people through it, not just, here's a mandate, figure it out.
I was going to jump out of my chair when Sarah mentioned the need to really have people with disabilities as instructors, as models, right? And I'm thinking about that mostly in terms of like AI, because when we talk about AI and having AI be more representative or less biased and so on, we often think in terms of data sets. Oh, like if only we fed it better data, right? That AI is going to become more inclusive. No, it's a people problem, not a data problem. We need to have more people of various abilities working on AI teams, developing AI tools, right? Identifying the barriers that those tools create, that maybe if we just had a homogeneous team of people working on AI development, they may not realize those barriers. So to me, I completely agree with that we just need to have more representation. And it all goes back to the saying in the disability studies world, nothing about us without us, right? People with disabilities need to be included in design and development and implementation. And then the other thing that I would say is also shift the burden to procurement, shift the burden to publishers, developers, right? Because we want you to bring in your expertise as faculty members who are content experts. And yes, everybody has a responsibility for accessibility, but we are paying people to sell us products. And so we can exercise the power of the market to make things more accessible by requiring it in our contracts to make sure that we're creating an ecosystem of accessibility, right? So it's not our one-off efforts in our courses. It's our whole institution needs to be accessible, right? And have accessible infrastructure for accessibility to really be fully realized.
There was one more question from our participant. Our institution is developing training for Title II. Any tips to support faculty will be really appreciated. And I'd like to start answering this question. And Ashley, thank you so much for mentioning that find different resources on campus. Let's say at UMass Amherst, Ideas Group, our instructions and engagement support group. I keep saying that all the time to all the instructors, we are your therapists. We are not enforcers, right? We developed a lot of cool materials for our instructors, and I'd like to, I know that UMass Amherst faculty is watching this seminar. If you go to the Ideas website, you will see Accessibility Hub. And in this Accessibility Hub, we have the entire section and with different options for you. You can either enroll to our self-paced Accessible U course. If you feel you don't have time for that, that's totally fine, because we do have support. You can reach out to instructional designers. You can ask all of your questions. We will discuss it with you. We will definitely recommend you to go through the Accessible U course, because we are not requiring that, but this is a great resource to start. You always can come back, right? We have a digital accessibility community. We invite all UMass Amherst faculty to join this community, where we can, share best practices together. They can come back to their departments and also share those ideas. We do have accessibility office hours. So if you don't have time for the appointment, if you want to ask this question right now, we have the support every day. You can go to UMass Amherst IML Instructional Media Lab, and the instruction center will be waiting for you. So these are just small ideas for to support faculty. So it's not about just designing a self-paced course and expecting them to complete that and solve all the issues. It's about providing different options, and that's how we are doing this at UMass. I also want to bring up to our faculty to their attention that we do have a tool that is available in Canvas. The tool is PopTech that helps to scan the entire course, show the alerts, show the errors, explain how to fix that, and you can easily press the button, fix it, and PopTech will help with those issues. So this is what we are doing here at UMass. It's 3:28 and I have two more things to show. The first one is we do have the special edition of the EdTech Ideas Digest. This is a great resource that inspires our instructors, and not only our instructors, but all educators. And in this special edition, we do have checklists on accessibility. We do have checklists for designing highly effective Canvas course. And we do have a lot of great tips about how to use AI to develop effective learning objectives, how to use AI to design your syllabi, or how to design truly accessible course syllabi with template. So we're definitely going to send this link in our key takeaways, but you can also scan the QR code now and you'll be able to download this PDF. By the way, this PDF is accessible. We checked that. So I'm confident that everyone will be able to access this document. And the last thing I'd like to share with you before we finish our event is we'd like your feedback. And you can see the QR code. Please scan this QR code now with your device and share your feedback. What do you think, like, what's your confidence level before the seminar and after the seminar? Share your ideas, how to improve these future events, specifically if you'd like any other topics to discuss. And we are going to analyze all the feedback, and we're going to choose one winner who will receive Sarah's book Design for Early Learners. Sarah, if you don't mind, can you briefly describe this book so that the audience know more about like why they need to take part in this competition?
Absolutely. So, and by the way, you can go to designforallbook.com to learn more. But this book is set up to where it's structured for starting with mindset, getting into designing for the classroom, designing digital asynchronous experiences, designing for virtual synchronous classes, kind of like the seminar that we're in today, and then also organizationally, thinking about different regulations globally, as well as here in the US. And it's really just your primer for everything accessibility. And it is broken down into 60 stories that were written by folks that have so individuals with disabilities, wide range of disabilities, backgrounds, folks that do instructional design, trainers, virtual facilitators, folks that are accessibility advocates, wide range of folks that are represented in this book. And you will learn firsthand from their lived experiences and their stories. Each chapter is very short. It starts with a story and it has a takeaway. Here's one thing you can do right now based on what you've learned in this story. And so it is a really practical guide. I obviously am biased, but I love this book. As I mentioned earlier, there are 26 of us that were participated in creating this book. So wide range of experiences for you to learn from. It was my goal to have this book be a representation of Design for All, which is meant to be living or showing the example of having people share firsthand experiences. I could have obviously just written this book and said, here's how you should do things, and you would not have gotten the same outcome because hearing these things and reading these things firsthand is an incredibly different experience, and I hope you all enjoy it.
Thank you so much. So share your feedback. There's a chance to win a book. Really great book. All right, that's
There
it.
is, and
Oh,
if you do go to the Design for All book website, there are there's a free community that you can join, and there are ongoing stories that are published through the blog. So it's a fantastic resource and a resources page there too, that is no charge.
sounds great. So what we're gonna do after today's seminar, we're gonna send you, as I promised, our key takeaways email. We're gonna include all the links that Sarah mentioned, that all the tools that we discussed today. And Sarah, we will reach out to you separately to get those links, the AI tool, all the tools that you suggested to use, and the link to the community, to our participants. Thank you so much for participating today in our seminar. It was a great pleasure to have all wonderful speakers, experts, and we'll see you next time.